I was staring at the certified letter in my hand when I realized my quiet life in Stillwater, Minnesota, was about to become anything but peaceful. The letter, printed on thick cream paper with the Meadowbrook Estates HOA logo embossed at the top, informed me that my outdoor wood furnace violated Code 17-B of the Neighborhood Covenants. I had 30 days to remove it or face daily fines starting at $50 and escalating from there. The signature at the bottom belonged to Patricia Chambers, HOA president, and her looping handwriting made my jaw clench. I had installed the outdoor furnace 6 months ago, right after moving into my house on Oakwood Drive. It was a beautiful unit, top of the line, and it heated my entire 2,400 square foot home for a fraction of what my gas bills used to cost. More importantly, I had checked the covenants before installation. There was nothing in there about outdoor furnaces. Nothing at all. The next morning, I drove to the HOA office located in a small building near the neighborhood entrance. Patricia Chambers sat behind a desk that looked like it had been imported from a corporate boardroom, completely out of place in the modest space. She was exactly what I expected. Mid-50s, blonde hair cut in a severe bob, and a smile that never reached her eyes. "Mr. Lucas," she said, glancing up from her computer. "I assume you received our letter, Paul Lucas," I corrected. "And yes, I did. I'm here because there's been a mistake. The covenants don't mention outdoor furnaces." Patricia folded her hands on the desk. "The covenants specifically state that no structures may be erected without prior approval from the board. You never submitted plans for approval." I pulled out my phone and opened the photos I had taken of the relevant covenant sections. It says no permanent structures. My furnace sits on a gravel pad. It's not attached to a foundation. Technically, it's movable. That's semantics, Mr. Lucas. That's the law, Mrs. Chambers. Her smile vanished. The board has voted unanimously. The furnace is an eyesore and must be removed. We have standards in this neighborhood. My backyard is completely fenced. Nobody can see it from the street. Mrs. Henderson next door can see it from her second-floor window. She filed the complaint. Of course she did. Deborah Henderson had complained about everything since I moved in. My grass was too long, then too short. My garbage cans were visible for 3 minutes past the pickup deadline. My car was parked 2 inches over the property line once. The woman had nothing better to do than stare out her window looking for violations. "I'm not removing it," I said calmly. "It's legal. It's not violating any actual covenant rules, and it's saving me thousands in heating costs." Patricia stood up, her chair rolling backward dramatically. "Then you will be fined. $50 per day starting May 1st. That's in 3 weeks, Mr. Lucas. I suggest you reconsider." I left the office angrier than I had been in years. Back home, I pulled out the covenant documents again, reading every line carefully. That's when I noticed something interesting. The section about structures specified that permanent buildings required approval. Temporary structures were limited to 30 days in one location. But what if something was semi-permanent and kept moving? The idea hit me like lightning. If the HOA wanted to play word games, I would too. I measured the gravel pad I had built for the furnace. It was 10 feet by 12 feet, plenty of room to maneuver. The furnace itself sat on steel runners, designed to be dragged into position by a tractor. I had a friend with a small Kubota who owed me a favor. 2 days later, I called Patricia's office and left a message. "This is Paul Lucas. I'm moving my outdoor furnace per our discussion. Just wanted to keep you informed." She called back within an hour. "You're removing it." "I'm moving it. 2 feet to the north. Technically, it's now in a new location, which means it's a temporary installation good for another 30 days. The silence on the other end of the line was delicious. "That's not what the rule means," she finally said. "Show me where it says otherwise." She hung up. The following Saturday, my friend Dave showed up with his tractor. We hooked chains to the furnace runners and dragged it exactly 2 feet north. I took photos, measurements, and even had Dave sign a statement confirming the date and distance. If this was going to be a legal battle, I wanted documentation. The next letter arrived 4 days later. This one threatened immediate fines and legal action. I responded with my own certified letter, citing the specific covenant language about temporary structures and noting that my furnace was now in compliance, as it had been relocated to a new position. Patricia showed up at my door the following Tuesday evening. She had brought backup, 2 other board members, Janet Hallbrook and Susan Martinez. All 3 women stood on my porch with identical expressions of disapproval. "This is ridiculous," Patricia said without preamble. "You know exactly what you're doing, following the rules," I replied. "Same as you asked. The spirit of the rule, the spirit doesn't hold up in court, the letter of the law does." Janet, a shorter woman with gray hair and a permanent frown, stepped forward. "You're making a mockery of this neighborhood. We have standards. We have property values to maintain. My furnace isn't visible from the street. It's not hurting anyone's property values." "It's ugly," Susan added. She was younger than the other 2, maybe early 40s, and seemed less certain about the confrontation. "That's subjective," I said. "And my fence blocks the view from anywhere except Mrs. Henderson's window. Maybe she should stop looking into my yard." Patricia's face reddened. "We could amend the covenants." "That requires a vote of all homeowners. You need 75% approval. Good luck with that." They left without another word, and I watched them huddle together at the end of my driveway, gesturing and arguing among themselves. I had made enemies, but I had also drawn a line. This was my property, and I had followed every rule. 3 weeks went by. Every Saturday, Dave came over and we moved the furnace another 2 feet. We documented each move with photos, GPS coordinates, and signed statements. The gravel pad was large enough that we could keep this up for months if necessary. The fines never materialized because they couldn't legally impose them. Each time the furnace moved, the 30-day clock reset. I was living in a weird loophole that nobody had ever thought to close. But Patricia wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The next attack came from an unexpected angle. A county inspector showed up at my door in mid-May, clipboard in hand, saying he had received an anonymous complaint about an unpermitted heating system. I showed him the installation manual, the manufacturer's specifications, and the permit I had pulled through the county before installation. Everything was legitimate. The inspector looked embarrassed and apologized for wasting my time. Then came the air quality complaint. Someone reported excessive smoke from my property. The Minnesota Pollution Control Agency sent an investigator who spent 2 hours measuring emissions while the furnace ran. The unit was EPA certified and burned cleaner than most fireplaces. Another dead end for Patricia. I ran into Dave at the hardware store in downtown Stillwater one Saturday afternoon. He was loading bags of concrete into his truck. "You know this is insane, right?" he said, grinning. "We've moved that furnace 6 times now." 7 after this weekend, I replied. "And yeah, it's completely insane, but I'm not backing down. What's she going to try next? No idea, but I'm ready for it." I wasn't ready for it. The lawsuit arrived in June. Patricia, representing the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, was suing me for creating a nuisance, violating the spirit of the covenants and diminishing property values throughout the neighborhood. The damages requested were $15,000 plus legal fees. I hired an attorney named Michelle Romano, a sharp woman in her 30s who specialized in property law. She read through the lawsuit in her office overlooking the St. Croix River and actually laughed. "This is the weakest case I've seen in months," she said. "They have no standing. You've violated nothing. Can they win in court? Absolutely not. But they can drag this out, cost you money in legal fees, and make your life miserable. That's probably the point. So what do? We file a motion to dismiss, and we countersue for harassment and frivolous litigation." I liked her immediately. The preliminary hearing happened in early July at the Washington County Courthouse. Judge Robert Morrison presided, an older man with white hair and a reputation for not suffering fools. Both sides presented their arguments. Michelle was precise and devastating, citing case law and covenant language. Patricia's attorney, a nervous young man named Kevin something, fumbled through his presentation. Judge Morrison took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Let me see if I understand this correctly. Mr. Lucas has a heating appliance in his fenced backyard. He obtained proper permits. The appliance meets all safety and environmental standards, and your argument is that he's violating rules by following the exact letter of those rules." Kevin cleared his throat. "The board believes the defendant is acting in bad faith, Your Honor." "Bad faith?" The judge looked at the photos submitted into evidence. "He's moving a furnace 2 feet every week to comply with a technicality in your own covenant documents." "Yes, Your Honor." "And your client, the HOA, never considered closing this loophole when they wrote the rules. It was never anticipated. Then that's your mistake, not his." Judge Morrison signed something and handed it to the clerk. "Motion to dismiss granted. This case is without merit. As for the countersuit, we'll schedule a hearing for that separately. Counselors, please approach." I couldn't hear what was said at the bench, but Kevin's face went pale. Michelle returned to our table looking satisfied. "What did he say?" I whispered. "He told Patricia's attorney that if he ever brings such a frivolous case before him again, he'll sanction him personally. The countersuit hearing is scheduled for September." We walked out of the courthouse into bright summer sunshine. I should have felt victorious, but I knew Patricia wasn't going to give up. People like her never did. I was right. The harassment escalated. Someone filed a complaint with the city about my fence being 2 inches too tall. It wasn't. Another anonymous complaint claimed I was running a business from my home. I wasn't. A third complaint alleged that I had too many vehicles parked on my property. I had 2, my truck and my car, both parked in the garage or driveway. Every complaint was investigated and dismissed, but each one took time and energy to deal with. I started keeping a detailed log of every interaction, every complaint, every visit from city officials. Michelle said it would be useful for the countersuit. Meanwhile, every Saturday, Dave and I moved the furnace. It became a neighborhood spectacle. People would stop their cars to watch. Some waved and gave us thumbs up. Others shook their heads. One guy brought us beer. The furnace had traveled nearly 20 feet across my backyard by August. Then Patricia made her biggest mistake. In late August, I came home from work to find my gate open and the furnace disconnected. The chimney pipe had been removed, the door to the firebox was open, and someone had scattered the wood I kept stacked nearby. Nothing was damaged, but someone had clearly entered my property without permission. I called the police immediately. The Stillwater Police Department sent Officer James Patterson, a stocky guy in his 40s who took the whole thing very seriously. He photographed everything, took my statement, and checked my security cameras. I had installed cameras after the lawsuit, figuring I needed to protect myself. The footage was crystal clear. Patricia Chambers, along with Janet Hallbrook, had entered my backyard at 2:30 that afternoon while I was at work. They had spent 15 minutes disconnecting the furnace and making it inoperable. Officer Patterson's expression darkened as he watched the footage. That's trespassing and criminal mischief at minimum, possibly destruction of property depending on if anything's damaged. I haven't checked everything yet, I said. We examined the furnace together. The chimney pipe was bent where they had forced it off. The door hinges were damaged. The control panel had been pried open and the wiring pulled loose. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was thousands of dollars in damage. I need to make a call, Officer Patterson said, walking back to his patrol car. 20 minutes later, 2 more police cars arrived. Patricia Chambers lived 4 streets over, and the police paid her a visit while I stayed home giving a detailed statement to a detective. By evening, both Patricia and Janet had been arrested for criminal trespass, criminal damage to property, and conspiracy to commit property damage. The story made the local news. The Stillwater Gazette ran a piece about HOA overreach with my case as the centerpiece. The headline read, "HOA President Arrested After Property Dispute Turns Criminal." My phone rang nonstop with reporters, neighbors, and random people offering support or criticism. Michelle called me that evening. "Have you seen the news? I've been trying to avoid it." "Don't. This is perfect for our countersuit. They've crossed from annoying to criminal. We can expand our case significantly." The countersuit hearing in September became a major event. The courtroom was packed with neighbors, reporters, and curious onlookers. Patricia and Janet sat with their attorney, both looking considerably less confident than before. Patricia had resigned as HOA president after her arrest, though the charges were still pending. Michelle presented our case methodically. She documented every false complaint, every attempt at harassment, the frivolous lawsuit, and finally the criminal trespass and property damage. She called me to the stand, and I walked through the entire timeline, from the first certified letter to the arrest. "Mr. Lucas," Michelle asked, "at any point did you actually violate the HOA covenants?" "No, madam." "I checked thoroughly before installing the furnace, and I've followed every rule throughout this entire situation." "Why did you start moving the furnace every week?" "Because the HOA was trying to use their own rules against me unfairly. I figured if they wanted to play word games, I would use the same rules to protect myself." "Did you ever intend to harass anyone?" "Absolutely not. I just wanted to heat my home efficiently and affordably." The HOA's attorney had no questions for me, which told me everything I needed to know about their position. Judge Morrison listened to closing arguments and announced he would issue his decision in writing within 2 weeks. We left the courthouse cautiously optimistic. The decision arrived 12 days later. Judge Morrison ruled in my favor on every count. The HOA was ordered to pay me $22,000 in damages, $6,000 for legal fees, $8,000 for the damage to my furnace, $5,000 for harassment and emotional distress, and $3,000 in punitive damages. Additionally, the judge issued a permanent injunction preventing the HOA from interfering with my furnace in any way, declaring it a legal installation that violated no legitimate covenant rules. But the real bombshell was in the final paragraph. Judge Morrison noted that the HOA board had acted in bad faith throughout the dispute, and suggested that the homeowners of Meadowbrook Estates might want to reconsider their current leadership and governance structure. The letter went out to all residents within days. An emergency HOA meeting was called for October 15th. I attended, sitting in the back of the community center. Nearly 200 homeowners packed the room, far more than usually participated in HOA business. Patricia wasn't there, still dealing with her criminal charges. Janet sat in front, looking miserable. Susan Martinez, the third board member, stood at the podium looking nervous. "We're here to discuss the recent legal issues and determine the path forward," Susan began. A man I recognized from 3 streets over stood up. "The path forward is obvious. We need to vote out the entire board and rewrite these ridiculous covenants. I've lived here 8 years and I'm tired of constant complaints about nothing." Applause erupted. More people stood to speak. Stories poured out about harassment, nitpicking violations, and a general atmosphere of fear about doing anything with their own properties. The HOA had become a weapon wielded by a few people to control everyone else. The vote wasn't even close. The board was removed, and a committee was formed to review and update the covenants. I was asked to serve on the committee, which felt ironic, but I agreed. If I was going to live here, I wanted reasonable rules that actually made sense. Over the next 2 months, we worked through every section of the covenants. We eliminated vague language, removed subjective rules about aesthetics, and established clear processes for complaints and approvals. The new covenants were presented to the neighborhood in December, and they passed with 88% approval. Patricia's criminal trial happened in November. She and Janet both pleaded guilty to reduced charges, trespassing and criminal damage to property. They received probation, community service, and were ordered to pay restitution for the damage to my furnace. Patricia also paid a $5,000 fine. I heard she moved out of the neighborhood shortly after, though I never saw her again. Dave and I moved the furnace one last time in late November, positioning it exactly where I wanted it permanently. Centered on the gravel pad, easily accessible for loading wood, and completely legal under every interpretation of every rule. I had the thing blessed by a priest friend of mine as a joke, but also because after everything it had been through, it deserved some recognition. Winter came hard and cold that year. My furnace ran beautifully, keeping my house warm while my neighbors paid through the nose for natural gas. A few people asked about my setup, and I gave them the contact information for the manufacturer. By January, 3 other houses in the neighborhood had ordered outdoor furnaces. The new HOA board was reasonable and practical. They focused on actual problems, street maintenance, snow removal, and genuine safety issues. Nobody cared about grass being half an inch too long or garbage cans being visible for 5 extra minutes. The neighborhood relaxed, and people actually started talking to each other again instead of spying and reporting violations. I ran into Deborah Henderson at the grocery store in February. She avoided eye contact and turned down a different aisle. I let her go. Some people never change, and that's fine. At least she couldn't weaponize the HOA anymore. Michelle Romano became a friend. We met for coffee occasionally, and she told me my case had become something she used as an example in seminars about HOA law. Apparently, it was a perfect illustration of how covenant language could be both a weapon and a shield, depending on who was holding it. "You could have just removed the furnace," she said one afternoon, stirring her latte. "Avoided all the hassle." "True," I admitted. "But then what? Let them push me around over anything they didn't like. Where does it stop?" Most people choose their battles differently. I didn't choose this battle. Patricia did. I just refused to surrender, she smiled. "And now you've changed an entire neighborhood's governance structure." That's not nothing. She was right. The changes rippled through Meadowbrook Estates in ways I hadn't anticipated. Property values actually increased because people wanted to live in a neighborhood with sensible rules. Turnover decreased. The community became more cohesive. All because I refused to back down over a heating appliance. The insurance check from the HOA's liability policy arrived in March, covering the full judgment plus interest. I used some of it to upgrade my furnace with an automatic feed system and better insulation. The rest went into my savings. The money was nice, but the principle mattered more. Dave stopped by on a Saturday in April, almost exactly a year after this whole mess started. We sat on my deck, drinking beer and watching the sun set over my very stationary furnace. "Think you'll stay here?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "This is home, and honestly, after everything, I've kind of grown attached to the place. Plus, the neighbors are better now. Most of them." "Most of them," I agreed. We clinked bottles and watched the light fade. The furnace sat quietly on its pad, exactly where it belonged, exactly where it would stay. A monument to stubbornness, property rights, and the power of reading the fine print. Officer Patterson stopped by one afternoon in May. He was off duty, just checking in to see how things had turned out. I gave him the tour of my furnace system and explained the efficiency calculations. He seemed genuinely interested. "You know," he said, "we get a lot of HOA complaints at the station. Most of them are petty nonsense, but once in a while they cross the line like Patricia did. I'm glad this one worked out. Me too. Though it was a long road. The right ones usually are. After he left, I thought about that. The right ones usually are. It would have been easier to give up to remove the furnace to avoid conflict. But easier isn't always better. Sometimes you have to stand your ground, even when it seems ridiculous, even when people think you're crazy. The new HOA board asked me to write an article for the neighborhood newsletter about the whole experience. I spent a week working on it, trying to find the right tone. Not vengeful, not gloating, but honest about what happened and why it mattered. The article ran in June. The response was overwhelming. People thanked me for standing up to an abusive system. Others shared their own stories of HOA harassment in previous neighborhoods. A few people disagreed, saying I should have just compromised, but they were in the minority. One letter particularly stuck with me. It was from an elderly woman named Dorothy who lived on the far side of the neighborhood. She wrote that she had wanted to install a wheelchair ramp for her husband, but was afraid the old HOA would fight her on aesthetic grounds. With the new rules and new board, she felt safe moving forward. Her husband could finally access their home easily. That letter reminded me that this was never really about my furnace. It was about whether a handful of people could use technical rules to bully and control their neighbors. It was about whether homeowners actually owned their homes or just rented them from an unaccountable board. It was about fairness and common sense. The summer passed peacefully. I worked in my garden, maintained my yard, and enjoyed my property without looking over my shoulder. The furnace sat dormant during the warm months, waiting for fall. I kept it maintained and ready, knowing it would serve me well when cold weather returned. In August, I attended the HOA annual meeting. It was nothing like the previous year's drama. The new board presented a budget that actually made sense. They discussed real improvements, repaving some damaged streets, upgrading the entrance lighting, and establishing a neighborhood watch program. People asked questions and got straight answers. Nobody mentioned furnaces or property line disputes, or any of the petty grievances that had consumed so much energy before. At the end of the meeting, the new HOA president, a retired engineer named Tom Foster, thanked everyone for attending and making Meadowbrook Estates a better place to live. Then he looked directly at me. "I also want to acknowledge Paul Lucas. I know last year was difficult, but the changes that resulted have benefited everyone here. Sometimes it takes someone willing to stand on principle to remind us what's important, so thank you." The applause surprised me. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. It felt good to be recognized, but more than that, it felt good to know the fight had been worth it. September brought the first cool nights, and I fired up the furnace for the season. It roared to life perfectly, filling my house with warmth and saving me money with every log that burned. I stood in my backyard, watching smoke rise from the chimney, and felt a deep satisfaction. Dave came by on a Saturday morning, his tractor hooked to a trailer, ready to move it. He asked with a grin. I laughed. Not today, not ever again, hopefully, end of an era, beginning of a better one. We shared coffee on my deck instead, talking about nothing important, enjoying the peace. The leaves turned colors in October, brilliant reds and golds that made the neighborhood beautiful. I raked my yard without anyone timing how long the leaves sat before I bagged them. I parked my truck in the driveway without worrying about the angle. I lived in my home like a normal person, and it felt incredible. Michelle called in November with news. Patricia's house had sold, and she had indeed moved out of state. Janet Hallbrook had also left the neighborhood, though I didn't know the details. Susan Martinez stayed and had apologized to me privately at the grocery store. She explained that she had gone along with Patricia out of fear and social pressure, not because she actually agreed. I appreciated her honesty and told her so. Winter settled in hard, and my furnace proved its worth day after day. Neighbors who had installed their own outdoor furnaces compared notes with me. We formed an informal group, sharing wood sources and maintenance tips. What started as a conflict became a community. I received a letter in December from a homeowner in a different suburb, someone who had read about my case online. They were facing a similar HOA dispute over solar panels and wanted advice. I spent an hour on the phone walking them through my experience, emphasizing documentation and understanding the exact language of their covenants. Michelle gave them a referral to a property attorney in their area. A week later, another call came from someone in Wisconsin facing an HOA fight over a chicken coop. Then another from Iowa about a garden shed. Word had spread, and somehow I had become an accidental advocate for homeowner rights against overreaching HOAs. I didn't mind. Each call was a reminder that what I had gone through mattered beyond my own situation. Every person who stood up to unreasonable rules made it easier for the next person. Every board that faced consequences for harassment thought twice before targeting someone else. Christmas in Meadowbrook Estates was festive and relaxed. The new board hosted a neighborhood party at the community center. Lights, music, food, and actual friendships being formed instead of surveillance and complaints. Kids ran around while adults talked and laughed. It felt like a real community for the first time since I had moved in. I brought cookies my sister had made and found myself in conversation with a couple who had just moved to the neighborhood. They asked about the area, the amenities, the general atmosphere. I told them honestly that there had been problems in the past, but things had improved dramatically. What kind of problems? The husband asked. HOA overreach, I said, but it's been addressed. That's good to hear. We were worried. Some neighborhoods get crazy with their rules. This one did for a while, not anymore, the wife smiled. What changed? I thought about how to answer that. People stood up for what was right, and the system actually worked eventually. It was the truth, simplified but accurate. The system had worked, but only because I had refused to be pushed around and had the resources to fight back. That realization bothered me sometimes. Not everyone could afford an attorney like Michelle. Not everyone had the time or energy to document everything and challenge every harassment attempt. The system worked for me, but it failed plenty of others. That thought stayed with me into the new year. In January, I started researching homeowner rights advocacy groups. I found a few national organizations, but nothing local to Minnesota. With Michelle's help and advice from Dave, who had experience with nonprofit work, I started laying groundwork for a homeowner advocacy network focused on the Twin Cities area. The idea was simple: provide resources, referrals, and support for people facing unreasonable HOA actions. Not to eliminate HOAs, which served legitimate purposes, but to keep them accountable and reasonable. We launched the website in March and held our first meeting in April. 12 people showed up. Each had a story. Each had been harassed or intimidated or fined unfairly by their HOA. We shared experiences, discussed strategies, and built connections. The Minnesota Homeowner Rights Coalition was born. Back in Meadowbrook Estates, life continued normally. My furnace ran. My bills stayed low. My relationship with my neighbors improved steadily. The changes we had made to the covenants were holding up well. The new board continued to operate transparently and fairly. Deborah Henderson sold her house in May and moved to a condo in St. Paul. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had complained constantly about the new HOA being too lenient. Nobody was sad to see her go. A young family with 2 kids bought her house, and they were delightful. The Minnesota Homeowner Rights Coalition grew steadily. By summer, we had over 100 members and had successfully helped 15 families resolve HOA disputes without litigation. 3 cases did go to court, and we provided support and resources for all 3. 2-1. One settled favorably. I never set out to become an activist. I just wanted to heat my house and be left alone. But sometimes life pushes you in unexpected directions. The fight over my furnace taught me that standing up to bullies matters, even when the bullies hide behind official titles and legal language. It taught me that most people are reasonable if you give them the chance. And it taught me that sometimes the most ridiculous battles have the most important consequences. On a Saturday morning in August, almost 2 years after this whole thing started, I stood in my backyard and stared at my furnace. It looked exactly the same as it always had. A large metal box on a gravel pad, functional and efficient and completely stationary. Dave walked over from where he had parked his truck. "Need to move it 2 feet. Not today," I said, laughing. "Not ever. Good. I think my tractor was getting tired of it anyway." We walked inside for coffee, leaving the furnace where it belonged. The battle was over. The war was won. And life, finally, was exactly as it should be. Peaceful, fair, and mine to live on my own terms. The Minnesota Homeowner Rights Coalition continued to grow and help people. My furnace continued to heat my house efficiently. Meadowbrook Estates continued to be a reasonable place to live. And Patricia Chambers, wherever she ended up, hopefully learned that you can't bully people forever. Eventually, someone pushes back. In September, we held a neighborhood block party on my street. Kids played, adults grilled, and everyone had a good time. Someone made a joke about moving furniture 2 feet every week, and everyone laughed. The story had become neighborhood legend, something people told newcomers as a cautionary tale about the bad old days before reasonable governance. I looked around at my neighbors, at the community we had built from the ashes of conflict, and felt genuinely content. My house was warm in winter, my property was mine to use reasonably, and the people around me were friends instead of adversaries. The outdoor furnace that started everything sat quietly in my backyard, doing its job without drama or controversy. Just as it should have from the beginning, just as everything should be when people act reasonably and follow fair rules. Sometimes you have to move a furnace 2 feet every week to prove a point. Sometimes you have to fight battles that seem absurd to defend principles that matter. And sometimes If you're lucky and stubborn enough, you win. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after. That furnace never moved again. It didn't need to. The point had been made, the battle had been won, and justice finally had been served. And really, that's all anyone can ask for: fairness, respect, and the right to live peacefully in their own home without unreasonable interference. It took a year of weekly moves, arrests, lawsuits, and complete restructuring of neighborhood governance. But we got there. The furnace sat on its pad. I sat on my deck. And life in Meadowbrook Estates went on better than before, because sometimes standing your ground changes everything.